Welcome in. I'm Liam Howard alongside Leo Rivera joining us for the first round of the NFL mock draft for 2026. It's a very interesting draft class. Not a ton of very obvious jump off the page talent, but what that creates is a lot of opportunities for a lot of guys who sort of fly under the radar, get onto a team and surprise some people, Leo.
Yeah, I think most definitely, Liam. And what also makes that exciting is the mock drafts. I don't think anyone really has a clear idea of where a lot of these players are actually going to end up. And it's going to be pretty much a wild card this year compared to a lot of the years in past, I feel like, Liam. So it's going to be exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to get right into it with my mock draft. Leo's mock draft will be coming out in a separate video. But first, we're going to start number one overall with the Las Vegas Raiders. This one's the only real no-brainer of the entire draft. Fernando Mendoza out of Indiana going to the Raiders.
Yeah, that one's kind of cut and dry, Liam. Makes a lot of sense there. They got Kirk Cousins, who should be kind of his veteran quarterback to kind of come mentor him and bring him along there. So you don't really have to throw him out in the fire. But I think Vegas definitely sees him as their quarterback in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And he fits the mold of a NFL-style quarterback, 3,500 passing yards, 41 touchdowns to just 6 interceptions. I think the personalities of Fernando Mendoza and Kirk Cousins those mesh incredibly well, too. I think that was more of a giveaway that they're going to draft Mendoza than anything else, is just the fact that they brought in a guy like Kirk Cousins. So Fernando Mendoza going number one overall to the Las Vegas Raiders. But then the questions start being raised as soon as the number 2 overall pick. There's a lot of indecision for who the Jets are going to take, but I'm going to have them picking up Arvell Reese from Ohio State, linebacker with 34 solo tackles, 6.5 sacks, athletic freak. I think he is going number 2 to the Jets.
Yeah, you talk about the 6'4" frame, 241 pounds there, Liam. There's a lot to like about what he can provide to any team. Really being physical, great tackler. I think, he provides a lot for a team. And, we talk about a team like the Jets who they need help on that defensive side of the ball bad. They're competing against Drake May. They got Josh Allen in that division. It is really tough for them. I think that's a good pick.
Yeah, absolutely. And he can play both as as more of a linebacker, but also pass rusher. He mostly played in pass rush at Ohio State this season. And I think that that's something that, especially now that they've lost Quinnen Williams, I think that's something that the Jets need badly. And I think he fits right into that mold there. And I think he's the next best player available on this board. So I think if you're the Jets with so many needs on that team, you just go to the next guy up. But my next pick with the Arizona Cardinals at number 3 is going to be Francis Mauigoa, the offensive tackle out of Miami. This dude is a monster. 6'6", 315 pounds. This guy was great and a huge part of why Miami made the run that they did in the playoffs this year.
Yeah, that's a really good one too, Liam. I think he's a prospect that's kind of, really sought after and going to be the number 1 tackle on a lot of people's boards. He displayed it all year long, in that ACC. Great playoff run, going deep, competing against a lot of premier, edge rushers. Even just at practice, the guys he has in that room to compete against are absolutely insane, top to bottom. We're going to talk about a couple of them, guys like Ruben Bain here soon, but I think that he's, again, a solid pick with experience that's going to be really good for, whoever ends up getting him.
Yeah, absolutely. In Arizona, they have Paris Johnson, who's a bit of a project on that offensive line. But aside from him, they do not have a lot going for him. And Kyler Murray was injured a lot of the time that he spent in Arizona. And now he's out the door. And whoever they're going to have at quarterback, that is someone they're going to need to protect this season if they want to get anything going with that team. They've got a lot of holes, especially on that offensive line. I think Francis Mauigoa is the most pro-ready and the best guy that they can go to there. But next, for my next pick with the Tennessee Titans at number 4, I'm going to stick with another offensive lineman. I'm going to go with Spencer Fano out of Utah. I think he is going number 4 to the Tennessee Titans. Give Cam Ward a little extra protection.
That's interesting, having 2 tackles going back to back there, Liam. I kind of respect that. I think if you're talking about, what you should draft and compared to what you probably will draft, I think that's very smart. He's talking about having a young player in Cam Ward who showed a lot of promise last season, but he was running for his life. He took a lot of hits. It was kind of ugly for him. And I think, if you really want to give him an opportunity to come out and display that he is going to be that quarterback of the future, you need to give him time. You need to give him good offensive line. And, the nice thing about Spencer is that he played in the Big 12 conference, going up against, again, teams like Texas Tech that just got such premier talent, and that's been shown throughout this draft. So I think talking about another prospect like that who, again, has experience, very quick. He did really good at the 40-yard dash, dropping 4.9. That's just absolutely ridiculous. Should be super exciting for him, Liam.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should have mentioned this at the start of the draft, but the way that we're doing this is if we were the GM, who would we pick? It's not necessarily what we predict the teams are going to do, but like you said, this is one of those ones where you kind of have to hold yourself from being trigger happy if you're the Titans. There's a lot that's been made about the receiver room, them needing a receiver, maybe going for one here, but the fact of the matter is this receiver class is one of the few position groups that is really loaded in this class, and I think that at this point in the draft, you've got an opportunity to get a premier offensive lineman that you can protect your quarterback of the future with. You got to go with him. I'm going to take Spencer Fano. But if you think me taking 2 offensive tackles in a row is crazy, wait till you hear my next pick at number 5.
Oh my goodness.
The Giants taking Monroe Freeling out of Georgia. 3 tackles in a row off the board. I think that the Giants are another team that offensive line has not come around for. Year after year that they've tried, they need to get a premier tackle early in this draft. Monroe Freeling is kind of the last of those top 3 like really premier guys, and I think that's the direction they should go.
Yeah, there's kind of a little bit of a drop off there. You go to like Caden Proctor at Alabama, still a good talent, but definitely when you're talking about top-notch competition tackles, there is really kind of a drop off there. But yeah, again, talking about Jackson Dart, a young quarterback, the same thing I just said about Cam Ward. You can come out and say you got to give him an opportunity to compete. And Liam, this is actually very shocking out of you. I did not think you were going to be the guy coming out and saying that teams need to be drafting O-line, but I respect that.
Yeah, I respect the offensive linemen. The offensive linemen get paid for a reason. And Monroe Freeling, 6'7", 315 pounds, another just unit of a man. And he was a guy who started this draft process pretty low on a lot of people's boards and really started to climb in the later stages. I think that's deserved. I think he's a great talent. And with Jackson Dart coming off an injured season and Cam Scatterbo as well in that backfield trying to get him some lanes, he's dealt with injury. Devin Singletary's dealt with injury. There's been a lot of injury in that backfield for the Giants. You got to protect that if you're New York, and I think that Monroe Freeling is kind of that last-ditch effort in this first round to be able to have a guy who's ready to go right away. But for my next pick with the Cleveland Browns, I am going to go away from the offensive line. We're going to get our first receiver off the board, and I'm going to go with Makai Lemon out of USC as the first receiver off the board. 5'11", 195 pounds from USC, and they'll get themselves a true wide receiver 1 in that offense.
Yeah, he's a great slot player, Liam. 5'11", he's really able to stretch the field and create mismatches, with nickel cornerbacks. I think in an offense like that, he could have a really good opportunity of coming out and being the premier player and actually, getting a majority of the targets, especially for whether it might be Deshaun Watson or Shedeur Sanders, who's going to be coming out at quarterback. They're going to need targets. I think he'll pair well with, potentially Jerry Jeudy in that room as well, who's also, borderline number 1 receiver kind of player. So keep Jerry out wide. You got him to come out play in the slot. It really just adds diversity to that Cleveland Browns offense that really needs help. They need a playmaker, and I really think that, this was a good decision going receiver there.
Yeah, I got to be honest, with Makai Lemon, he's kind of looked at as, by a lot of people, as the 3rd receiver behind Carnell Tate and Jordan Tyson. But to me, I look at the production of him, the only 1,000-yard receiver out of those 3. He was the number 1 target for that USC offense. 1,156 yards, 11 touchdowns. And I think that a lot more is made about, the frame that he has, and maybe a little bit of worry about he's not going to be able to physically dominate the way that Tate or Tyson might be able to. But I think you got to, at a certain point, look at who catches the football, who gives production to his team. I think that's what Makai Lemon does. I think going either other way would be overthinking it just a little bit. And I think that for the Browns, they cannot afford to do that, and they should take Makai Lemon. But then we go to the Washington Commanders at number 7 overall, and this is a guy who might also be the 2nd best player on the board. Just hasn't really fit with any of the other teams to this point. Give me Jeremiah Love out of Notre Dame. I think that a premier RB1 in that backfield would do wonders for that Commanders team.
Yeah, you have Jaden Daniels, who kind of had a sophomore slump. He was really beat up last season. And one of the reasons why is because the Commanders just haven't had a running back they can rely on, Liam. They've been really doing a running back by committee. In his rookie season, Jaden Daniels was able to come out, and I'm pretty sure he led the team in rushing. That's just not what you want to see out of your quarterback there. You want to keep him, off the ground. You don't want him taking any necessary punishment. And that's kind of why the Commanders really were, not as good as they were the previous season. I would say just the injury bug really got a hold of them this year. But you go out, you get, our running back in Jeremiah Love, who has been explosive at his time at Notre Dame. Anytime he's on TV, he's just a freak to watch. He's always going to make the big play when you need him to. He's been an anchor, a true, bell cow running back, you could say. And I think he's going to be really exciting at the next level and a good fit in the Commanders.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the Commanders last year, they made the interesting choice to trade away Brian Robinson. It looked like maybe Bill Krosky-Merritt was going to be the guy for them. He didn't have the year that they expected, and that backfield ultimately suffered as a result. The offensive line has its question marks, but I think that going with Jeremiah Love, especially if he's here at 7, I think that him falling to this point, and not that 7 is necessarily a fall, but for a guy of the talent of Jeremiah Love, 1,300 rushing yards, 18 touchdowns, just a freak of nature. I think that that's the place that you have to jump on him if you're Washington. That moves us then to the New Orleans Saints, and I have them taking David Bailey, the defensive end out of Texas Tech. This is another guy who is just a monster and a scary dude to line up against on the offensive line side of the ball.
I'm gonna be honest, Liam, I'm kind of surprised that he lasted this long on your board. I know you were going offensive line, but David Bailey is one of those guys that I'm a really big fan of. What he was able to do last season in the Big 12 Conference, just absolutely wreck games, absolutely take over games, just super long. He's able to get up underneath tackles and use leverage, just really fundamental technique, and he can help play the run as well, too. He's no slouch there. I think he's really, a complete prospect. You talk about Orville Reese, I think he's definitely up there. Those could be, 1 and 2, flipping back and forth on defensive prospects of which one you want to take. I think both guys are pretty solid, but I'm really surprised you see him go here. I think it makes sense, though, with the Saints because they kind of went offense last year. They really loaded up with young talent, and they kind of like Tyler Shuck in the direction they're moving now. So I think, going to the defense, finding some premier edge players who are going to be able to rush a quarterback is exactly what they need.
Yeah, and we're at a point with the Saints where Cam Jordan is definitely in his decline. I think that they are needing someone to step up. And while Cam Jordan's a great player, he'll also be someone great to teach David Bailey as he is maturing in that defense. I think that is the perfect place to go if you are the Saints. And yeah, I just think that, like you said, he's a guy who is very versatile on that defensive line. And I think that he's someone that a defense with a lot of holes can use in a lot of different ways. And that's the type of player that you need to take at this point in the draft. But then next up at number 9, we are sticking in the same vein, and that is going to be Rueben Bain going to the Kansas City Chiefs. I think that the Chiefs are needing a premier pass rusher as well, with Chris Jones also starting to decline a little bit, dealing with some injuries. I think that Rueben Bain is the guy to go to. I think that this is just a dude out of Miami who another just physical freak of nature.
I mean, this draft's edges in linebacker are just insane, Liam, because again, Rueben Bain, just an absolute game wrecker. We were talking about it a little bit earlier when you were mentioning Francis, and I was saying, he competes against some dogs, and Rueben Bain is who I was alluding to there. He can, again, change games, put tackles on their butts, and just intimidate players. And I think when you go to the Chiefs, you make a great point with Chris Jones getting old. The Chiefs are a team that's had really great premier players at the positions they needed to, but they're fading out. They're at the end of the career, like you've mentioned. I think you need a new face that can come out, be here for a decade, and get after guys like Bo Nix in that division, get after Kirk Cousins or Fernando Mendoza and Justin Herbert. So a real intimidator. I think that's another great pick if the Chiefs were to take him.
Yeah, 6'3", 275 pounds, had 9.5 sacks. And we mentioned how Francis Mauigoa was a huge part of their run to the national championship game. I mean, talk about Rueben Bain. That guy came alive in the playoffs, and he was a problem for all those opposing teams. The production wasn't quite where you'd expected it to be for a guy like Rueben Bain throughout the regular season, but then he came alive in those playoffs, and it was clear this is a first-round pick. This is one of the best edge rushers in a loaded edge rusher class. And yeah, I think he's the right pick there for Kansas City to get after the talented quarterbacks in the AFC West. But then another guy who you could sort of say this is a bit of a slide for him, I got the Cincinnati Bengals taking Caleb Downs out of Ohio State. This guy is a incredible safety, one of the best overall prospects in this draft, but I think in terms of all those other teams needing different scheme fits, he doesn't quite fit in there as well. And then with Cincinnati having the defense they've had over the last couple seasons, Caleb Downs has got to be where they go. Best player on the board at this point.
Yeah, 6 foot, 200 pounds. He's everything you want to see out of a safety there, Liam. He could really, cover the field. He's had, 6 interceptions that he's been able to, come out and change games with. And I think that's exactly what you want to see from a safety. Being able to go out there, be a ball hawk, be able to play the field, but also coming up and playing the run, right? That's kind of what you're going to have to do as well, especially in the NFL. So that's why his frame is, very appealing, because he has that size. He has that size to be able to come down, which isn't necessarily his game, but that's what makes him so good. He's versatile. He'll do anything you ask him to, has great instinct just as a ball player, and definitely one of those more higher IQ guys that you want in your locker room.
Yeah, absolutely. And, he isn't necessarily, this year at least, he wasn't used to be a guy who came up and and stuffed guys very much, but he's a willing tackler, that's for sure. 68 total tackles this season, and you look at his first year, his 2023 season at Alabama, he had 107 total tackles that season. This is a guy who can come up and he can hit guys. It's just not something that Ohio State needed from him.
Correct.
How loaded that defense was this past season with Arvell Reese there, quite frankly, to do that job. So I think that Caleb Downs is a guy that they can play anywhere on the field, and I mentioned this earlier with the Saints. In a defense that has so many different holes, you need a guy who can fill multiple at the same time with his versatility. I think that's something that Caleb Downs brings to the table, and also just an Ohio guy, keeping him in the state, moving him from Ohio State over to Cincinnati. I think that he'll be a hometown hero. Bengals fans will love him, and he's going to give him good reason to. But then we get our next receiver off the board here. I have the Miami Dolphins taking Carnell Tate, also out of Ohio State.
Wow, this is interesting. You're going to pass up Jordan Tyson twice, Liam Howard?
I am indeed. I'll talk about why later.
Okay. Yeah, this is kind of, another one of those prospects where you're looking at production, I would say, Liam, according to you, I think going into that. Again, being at wide receiver, he kind of has a good, reputation there of what he may be able to do in the league, and kind of just the history of production with those Ohio State wide receivers. But at 6'2", 192 pounds, big target, really explosive, been able to change direction, really good with his route running, good hands, all the fundamentals that you want in a wide receiver. And like you said, I think that size is what kind of makes him really appealing, just knowing he's going to be able to be a good mismatch against any cornerback, be able to come out and, potentially be a wide receiver one on his day one in the offense.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a very rangy player as well. I think that that's something that any team is getting out of him. And another thing you got to talk about, as you mentioned, with the production, this is a guy who's been competing with Jeremiah Smith for targets at Ohio State, and it hasn't slowed him down. He had 875 yards this season, still hauled in 9 touchdowns. I think that and he was a red zone threat for Ohio State as well. That's something that I think the Dolphins could very much benefit from. And after they've gotten rid of Jalen Waddle at this point, no more Tyreek Hill.
No more Tyreek.
The most depleted receiver room in the NFL. They need a receiver like this. And like you mentioned, he's a matchup nightmare. He's someone that they can get in the end zone frequently. They can use Devon Achane to get them down the field, but Malik Willis is going to need someone to throw the ball to if they get to the red zone. And I think that Carnell Tate fits that mold perfectly. But then up next, we have the Dallas Cowboys, and I have them going to the defensive side and taking Mansour Delane, the cornerback out of LSU.
Interesting going cornerback. I think, Jerry Jones in the past has kind of shown he's going to do whatever the hell he wants, whether or not that's what fans want to see. But I think if you talk about, teams again in the division that the Cowboys are going to be playing, they have A.J. Brown at the Eagles, who knows for how long. You have, Scary Terry over there in Washington. You're going to need to be able to come out and play defense, especially if you're looking long term at going to the Super Bowl. The NFC's got a lot of the premier wide receivers. JSN, you have Puka Nacua over there with the Rams. You're going to have to go out there and cover. And you talk about a position that's been kind of stretched thin for the Cowboys over the past couple seasons. Their depth really hasn't been there. I think that's going to be a good pickup for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that last season with LSU, their defense was very shaky at times, but Mansour Delane was one of the few bright spots consistently for them. And I think that that is something he's going to bring to the table for the Cowboys. And like you mentioned, that receiver, the receiver rooms across the NFC East are some of the best in the NFL. They need a guy like Mansour Delane who can win and press, who can actually, step up against some of these guys like an A.J. Brown, who can step up against some of these guys across, the rest of the NFC East that they are going to have to face. And I think that he is going to be able to do that. And it's an interesting cornerback class. There's a lot of guys with high ceilings and, and low floors. You kind of think of Jamal McCoy, who missed the entire season, and, he's still projected to be a first-round pick, but you've obviously got that injury concern, and he hasn't played in a while. A lot of guys like that who are, guys with very high ceilings, but the floor could be a disaster. And I think with Mansour Delane, he's one of the few guys who has really stood out as consistent, and he's going to play well, and you know what you're getting from him. So I think he's got to be the first cornerback off the board, but I'm going to stick with cornerback. I think that the Los Angeles Rams are going to turn right around at the next pick at number 13 overall, and they're going to take Avion Terrell out of Clemson. Now, as a Clemson fan myself, I have watched a lot of Avion Terrell, and he is one of those sort of high ceiling, low floor guys, but the low floor isn't quite as low as some of the other guys. He's had some coverages where he has just matched up with a guy poorly all game long, and you will see him get burned throughout the course of the game. You're like, oh man, I'm not exactly sure about Avion Terrell anymore, but then he'll have some games where he is locking down some of the best receivers in the ACC. He's been doing it, since 2023 with Clemson, and he's just continued to be a staple of that defense.
Again, you talk about potential. I think that's what you get later out of the first round. That's kind of what some of these guys are. You're looking at their frame, you're looking at what they've been able to do at their best, Liam Howard, and not necessarily the consistency. I think you get him into a room over there with the Rams, where they have really good coaching over there and good development. The Rams have shown that they're able to get young players and actually give them opportunities to work during the offseason, get them in the preseason and actually develop. I don't think he's gonna be pressured to necessarily come in and start right away over there, but again, you talk about the NFC that's got a lot of tough wide receivers, especially in that division, and then potentially the Cardinals might be able to go out and get someone again. They have an elite tight end as well over there, so definitely picking him up is going to be a good pick for them if they're able to maximize on his potential and his capabilities.
Yeah, and if you're the Rams, a very loaded roster, so you can't really go wrong with the pick here. I think that going with someone with a lot of potential, you've got the depth to allow for development, and pairing him alongside Quentin Lake, I think, would be a great matchup there for the Rams, and that's going to help them make a playoff push. All right, so then that leads to the Baltimore Ravens at number 14, and I have them taking Akeem Mesidor, another guy out of Miami.
Ooh, Akeem Mesidor. Talk about the other counterpart to good old Ruben Bain over there. This guy is a monster too, Liam. We talked about that competition in the edge room there, but at 6'3", 259 pounds of straight manhandling this. I mean, Akeem Mesidor is really good. Obviously, can play the run, I think, a little bit better than Ruben Bain. I think that's a little bit more of his strength, is what he can provide there. As a true edge, really setting and being an enforcer there, but could also get after the quarterback and is just a really good player. And you talk about, the style of Ravens football and what they've been able to do in a really physical AFC North division. You talk about always having to be able to stop the run against those kind of teams. I think you need a guy like Akeem Mesidor to come in and be an enforcer and be physical.
Yeah, absolutely. 12.5 sacks. You can't argue with that out of Miami. An incredible pass rusher. And I think the one major concern with him right now is his age. He's obviously been in college football since 2020. So he's 25 years old right now. So you get to contract time, you're looking at a guy who's like 28 years old roughly. And that's not something you want if you are an NFL team trying to figure out if you should pick up a fifth-year option on a guy and and move forward with him. But I think you can't argue with what he put on film. And if you're the Ravens, especially this season, the Max Crosby trade falling through, they did obviously bring in Trey Hendrickson, but another guy to go alongside him would go a long way for that defense. And I think if Akeem Mesidor is still here at 14, you can't pass him up. So I have the Ravens taking Akeem Mesidor. But then that leads to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I have them going with a guy who was incredible at the Combine. That's Sonny Styles out of Ohio State.
Yeah, he kind of had a good, boosting to his stock there as a linebacker, but 6'5", 244 pounds. I mean, he really did impress there, just being an absolute freak of nature, getting him to get out there or walk around. 43.5-inch vertical, Liam. I mean, geez, he really just does jump off the page with his athletics, and he is able to obviously tackle and do a lot of good things well as a football player too, especially being at Ohio State. Again, we've talked about that competition aspect of getting to play, really good players. But for you, having him go to a team like the Bucks, who's losing, Levante David to the offseason, who's going to retirement, I think he's a good guy to come in and potentially try to help fill those shoes there, and really is a need for them. So I think it's a good fit.
Yeah, that's the thought process for me is, you're losing him this offseason, and that's a linebacker room that, is sort of hanging on a little bit by a thread, and so they needed to replenish it already, but I think now it's the number one need for the Buccaneers coming into this draft. I think Sonny Styles fits that mold perfectly. This is a guy who's going to fly to the football, as was seen also in his 40 time. What did he run? What was it? Was it a 4... He ran like a
4.46.
4.46. Yeah, 4.46. It was the fastest among all the linebackers. It was an incredible 40 time.
Ridiculous.
Both of the Styles brothers actually had an incredible combine, but Sonny Styles had a much better regular season than his brother did, and just overall a physical freak of nature at the linebacker position. That's something that the Buccaneers are going to be able to get a lot of use out of, I think, this coming season. But then that moves us to the Jets' second pick of the first round, and right here I have them taking their quarterback. I'm going to go with Ty Simpson to the New York Jets.
This one's not too much of a surprise, just based upon need there, Liam. I think you were smart to go best player available early on with their second pick, knowing that you're going to have another option to go back and draft Ty Simpson. I know there's been kind of some recent praise. Dan Orlovsky, the propagandist, has been, hauling for Ty Simpson to be drafted. I think it's worked. I think he will ultimately get selected in the first round. I don't necessarily believe that he's a first-round quarterback personally, but I do think that the Jets needed to take a shot at someone. They have to swing at this position. You can't keep relying on bringing in old free agents, and Geno Smith is not going to lead you to the promised land anytime soon. I promise you that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Geno Smith signing was merely gearing up to bring in Ty Simpson. Ty Simpson's major concern is that he only started for one season of college football, and that's something that it makes it very difficult to adjust to the NFL in general, regardless of where you started.
For sure.
I think that a guy starting one season and then having to move up to the NFL, that's just too little experience for a guy to come in and succeed right away. So I think bringing in Geno Smith, giving him the chance to sit on the bench, even if Geno Smith doesn't play good football, that's still a chance to sort of learn the system, learn what the NFL feel is like, and just get used to, even in practice, just going up against NFL players every single day. That is something that is, that's the type of adjustment that kills a lot of careers for quarterbacks. And I think that that's the perfect situation for Ty Simpson. While I also do think that there is one guy who, not many people are looking at that is going to be, sort of behind these guys at the quarterback position, I do think it's a considerable drop after Ty Simpson. And you're not looking necessarily at franchise quarterbacks anymore. And so I think if you're the Jets with a dire need at the quarterback position, this has to be your guy. So Ty Simpson to the Jets at number 16. That moves us to the Detroit Lions at number 17. And this is an interesting pick. This could go really poorly, but I think that the potential is so much there that they kind of have to go with him. I got Jermod McCoy of the Tennessee Volunteers going to the Detroit Lions.
Wow, okay. I thought you were potentially going to say Colton Hood there for a second. go to his counterpart over there. But yeah, you mentioned, having an injury, blowing out an ACL in 2025 and late last season really sucked, kind of derailing his potential season that he could have had, I think, as a complete player. But you have to look at the body of work and what he was able to do. At 6'1", 188 pounds, I think there's a lot of promise there. There's frame, there's, the level of competition, again, as being in the SEC, we've mentioned about this. Who you play matters, in my opinion, going up against those elite wide receivers. Play really good in zones, got good man skills as well. But I think, like you said, teams are going to be taking a chance on him. But if it works out for the Lions, that's going to be phenomenal because, best case scenario, you get a shutdown corner.
Yeah, and I think that that's why they've got to take him at this point. I think the talent was so visible in 2024, and it looked like if he was healthy for 2025, this was going to be a guy who was a top 5 pick, but that injury really did tank his stock. But if you're the Lions, who struggled with that defense the last couple seasons, and last season especially, they really struggled on that defensive side, and ultimately killed their season. So I think that a guy like Jermod McCoy, if you can get a long-term cornerback answer out of him, that is invaluable for them, and so that's what makes it worth it. But then there's the concern of the injury, adding into a defense that has been injured over the last couple seasons. That's where it can really go wrong, is if these injury problems persist in a defense that already struggles with its health. I think that that could be disastrous for the Lions, but I overall think that the ceiling is just too high to ignore, so they're going to go with Jermod McCoy at number 17. But then that moves us across the NFC North to the Minnesota Vikings, where at number 18, I have them taking Dylan Thieneman, the safety out of Oregon.
Yeah, again, you're going with a guy who had all Big 12 honors there, some conference recognition, a really consistent player for Oregon. And you talk about, what they've been able to do as a team and just their consistency in the college football playoff and their rankings and, the pride that comes with being an Oregon Duck and their representation in the National Football League. There's good translation. Dan Lanning's a good coach that really gets guys ready for the pros. And I think, at 6 foot, he's a sizable safety. He's going to come out and be able to do a lot of, good things for the team as a leader and got good anticipation too as well. So I think that's a interesting pick there, going towards the Vikings. That's a team with, I think, a handful of needs in a variety of places, but you have to go safety there as well. They've been lacking a true star there at that position for a while.
They have, and Harrison Smith on the way out. I think that's a major loss there, and I think that replenishing that position is going to be key. That secondary has struggled. They've got the needs, obviously. Quarterback is still a bit of a question mark, but like I said, with this quarterback class, it's after Ty Simpson, it is certainly a drop, and they brought in Kyler Murray, who at least can be a guy they can look to start and potentially hope he can get back to his form. But I think with this pick, you get yourself a willing tackler. This is a guy who had 92 tackles this season, and 2 seasons before that he had over 100 at Purdue. And I think that type of player in a Minnesota Vikings defense that is mostly known for its pass rush, but then that secondary sort of falling behind, I think that he is going to be able to sort of play both. He can come up, be a willing tackler if needed, and he's also great in coverage. I think that is that's the perfect pick right there. That is a Minnesota Viking fitting the mold. Then at number 19, this is a guy I'm really excited about, going to the Carolina Panthers, Kenyon Sadiq, also an Oregon Duck tight end.
Yeah, Kenyon's definitely the number 1 tight end coming off the board for sure, Liam. I think a lot of teams are kind of looking at him. I'm kind of surprised that, in your board, he's dropping down to 19, which isn't necessarily a drop, but I do, see a world where potentially some teams, fall in love with him early and really kind of want to go up and snag him. He's not the tallest at 6'3", but at 241 pounds, he's nimble, he's quick, he's been able to go out, catch the ball, 440. I mean, come on, Liam. Really a true receiving threat inside at that tight end position. He's going to be able to go out and help a lot of teams, especially, in offense with the Panthers. You have Bryce Young's career resurgence. I think that he could be one of those guys that you're able to shoot down and, have a consistent target over the middle that could really help a quarterback, and I think Bryce Young would appreciate having him.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Panthers have struggled at that tight end position. Tommy Tremble has not been the answer for them, and I think that Kenyon Sadiq is just, like you said, he's a freak of nature. There's a lot of those types of guys in this draft, but he is the definition when it comes to the tight end position. That guy in the red zone is something that I think Carolina could benefit from greatly. They need to go up and get a guy. They were hoping Xavier Legette could potentially be that player, but he has not been to this point in his career. Tetairoa McMillan has proved to be versatile in that receiving game, but a secondary option at this point, I think going with Kenyon Sadiq, that is the perfect play there. He's going to provide you the receiving threat, and he's also a capable blocker. I think that, with his size, he can block perfectly fine, and that is also something that the Panthers need to protect Bryce Young, because he gets hit a lot back there. But then that brings us to the Cowboys once again. I have a bit of this is a pick that I think not a lot of people might have in the first round, but I got the Cowboys taking Jacob Rodriguez out of Texas Tech. You mentioned Jerry Jones doing what he wants. This right here is Jerry Jones doing what he wants. Jacob Rodriguez, not necessarily a guy that fits the NFL mold for a linebacker, but he produces and he hits the snot out of people.
You know what, Liam? Jacob Rodriguez is one of my favorite players in all of college football last year. And I think it's crazy the disrespect he's been getting, because I don't want to hear no crap about not an NFL body, not meant for the next level. Turn on the film. Look at the production. That guy can match up with any tight end. He's going to come out and he's going to lay the thumping with a cowboy collar and a nasty attitude and just a mindset that you want on defense. I think if Jerry Jones went out and snagged him, I think that would probably be potentially the steal of the draft, dare I say, because I think we're looking at a 10-year NFL pro in, Rodriguez and what he's able to bring. I'm very excited about him. I think him being projected in more later first, second rounds just kind of sucks. Just again, like you said, just because of his size. But again, turn on the tape, man. This dude's a freaking monster. He's a football player. And if the Dallas Cowboys got him, I think he'd become a fan favorite really fast.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a deplenished linebacker room. So he would start right away. There's no question about it. But, 6'1", 230, that scares a lot of people away. But that's 6'1", 230 pounds of thump. 7 forced fumbles in one season. That's incredible. Plus 4 interceptions. I mean, you talk about the height being maybe a concern. He's rangy. He recorded 4 interceptions. He reads quarterbacks' eyes incredibly
He's smart.
Yeah, he's a smart player. A lot of people that I've seen looking at him, and I totally see this when I look at him, is this is a guy who looks like he's played quarterback before. The way he reads quarterbacks' eyes, he knows how to shift his body to trick the quarterback based on where they're looking. That is something that pops up all the time with him on film. And then 128 total tackles. I mean, just the meat and potatoes of that Texas Tech defense this year that was so good. And was in the Heisman race. I mean, that out of a linebacker alone.
He should have been a finalist.
Yeah, absolutely.
He should have been a finalist.
Should have been a finalist. And that right there, out of a linebacker alone, says so much about who Jacob Rodriguez is as a player. So I think the Dallas Cowboys go here. Jerry Jones is the one that's willing to go against the grain, and I think it'll actually pay off for Dallas in this case. But then up next, we have a guy that we've kind of mentioned a few times here. The Pittsburgh Steelers taking Jordan Tyson out of Arizona State.
Wow, it's kind of been a while since a wide receiver's gone there. I think him being the third one taken off the board is kind of interesting, Liam. Again, no one really knows what's going to happen, but I think a lot of projections kind of potentially see him as a wide receiver one in this class. Personally, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I also like Carnell Tate as well. But I think, going to the Steelers, you're talking about a team that's kind of rebranding potentially. You're bringing in the new era of Mike McCarthy. You're saying goodbye to Mike Tomlin, who was there for so many years. Why not go out and get a flashy guy who's been in college football? He has plenty of experience, and when he gets those targets, he wants 10 targets a game. This is a guy who wants the ball. He's going to go out and produce, Liam. He can find the end zone. I think there's a lot to like about what he brings to a team.
Yeah, absolutely. And just another rangy receiver. 6'2", 200 pounds, great wingspan. This is another great athletic receiver. The main reason that he drops this far on my board, first of all, I think the fact that there is so much depth at the receiver room is going to encourage a lot of teams to say, hey, we can wait until later in this draft and we can get somebody else. But I think the injury he was dealing with this season was concerning. And I think that type of injury when you're looking at a lot of teams who need a consistent receiver who is going to be on the field at all times, because a lot of these teams that are looking for a receiver are looking for them because they've had injuries to their other receivers and they need some more consistency that can be on the field at all times. I don't think you're getting that necessarily out of Jordan Tyson, and he also was battling an injury last season, missing the college football playoff for Arizona State he was a great part of their run up until that point, but then he suffered that injury that prevented him from playing in their biggest game of the season. And I think that that type of injury concern pushes him down the board just a little bit. But I think when it comes to the Steelers, their team, they've had the issues with DK Metcalf. I think they are looking for a premier wide receiver one, especially if you've got Aaron Rodgers coming back. You need him to have someone to get the ball to who's going to make plays after the catch. I think Jordan Tyson has that ability, and so I still think they are getting a great receiver here. And to get him at 21, that to me is a steal.
100% is, Liam, and like you mentioned, I think that's a valid reasoning for in this mock you having him as a third receiver off the board. So I'm not going to fight you on that.
Yeah, and then up next is the Los Angeles Chargers. I got them taking another guy who's kind of a question mark, Peter Woods out of Clemson.
Defensive tackle now, Liam, finally getting back to the big boys. I know you started off with, a slew of offensive linemen, but yeah, coming out again to one of your boys in Peter Woods, who was over there at Clemson. I'm kind of interested to hear more of your analysis, because obviously I wasn't watching, I'm not a diehard Clemson fan by any means, but at 6'3", 298 pounds, basically the 3 bills, I think he provides a lot of opportunity as a run stuffer and just what able he could be in the middle of that field.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, looking at the Chargers and how he fits, I think that Khalil Mack, still being there and generating, the pass rush for the Chargers is going to be huge. And then you can sort of fit Peter Woods in alongside to be that run stuffer. And I think that the fact that, like you mentioned, that 6'3", 315-pound frame, this dude's big. This is a big player. This is a guy who, you put him over the middle and he should, in theory, just bring in everyone that comes his way. But the only issue has been, and this is something I've seen a lot from watching Clemson football, is you don't notice him on there out on the field a lot. You don't notice him stopping that run very much, and that's because he doesn't. This season, in 2025, expected to be one of the leading tacklers on that defensive line for Clemson. He only had 30 total tackles this season, and that was his career high. He never really took that leap to superstardom, and this is a guy who was looked at as a top 10 pick going into this season, as were a lot of guys on Clemson that all ended up disappointing. But this is a guy who in particular, a lot of people were like, this is like the best defensive tackle in this class, which I still think he is, but not by the landslide that it was at the start of the year. And that's because his production never really showed up. So I think you're getting a guy who checks all the boxes when you look at the physicality and what you need out of an NFL defensive tackle. But I just was not liking what I was seeing in the film and in his production on the field. So more of a project, I think. But if you're the Chargers, you've got some veteran presences in that defense that can help him do that. But yeah, I think there's still some questions to be asked about Peter Woods. But that leads to the Philadelphia Eagles at 23. I have them taking a safety, AJ Halsey, out of LSU.
A little more SEC action there, Liam. I know that's kind of something that you've been looking after and going to get. But when you talk about Halsey at 6 foot, 215 pounds, he has a good frame. Again, we've talked about, willing tackles, 89, being able to come out and fit in the box. He's definitely a pretty complete, safety there from that aspect. Again, not necessarily super flashy or stood out, jumped off the screen, I would say, when watching LSU football, but still consistent. That's kind of a good thing sometimes too. You don't necessarily want your name being called out a bunch of times as a defensive back, but being able to come in, play the run, and you look at a team like the Philadelphia Eagles who need more depth in that safety position, specifically in their back end. They've kind of, over the last 2 years, kind of done a rebranch over there. You had Reed Blankenship, who's kind of been consistent, but it's going to be interesting to see where you can fit in there.
Yeah, with Blankenship on his way out, heading to the Texans this offseason, that's a major need that they're going to need to replenish. And I think the Eagles, of course, have one of the most complete rosters in football, and they have for quite some time. So with them, it's sort of like, okay, what's the one thing that you sort of lost this offseason that you need to make up? Go fix that in the first round, and then the rest is just whatever. But with AJ Halsey, I think that this is a guy who plays great in coverage, and I think he is going to make up for what they're losing with Reed Blankenship very well. I think they get the same type of player out of Halsey, and so that is why he is the move for the Eagles with their pick at number 23. But then moving along to number 24, this is another guy who I think is a lot lower on some people's boards than he is on mine, but I have the Cleveland Browns taking Brandon Cease out of South Carolina.
I like South Carolina, what they were able to do this past season, Liam, and just consistency wise. And at 6 foot, 189 pounds, again, another big frame for a cornerback, and he's played a lot of man coverage over there, South Carolina as well. So I think that's one thing that's appealing for NFL teams specifically, is that he's going to be comfortable traveling around doing whatever you need him to do. And you talk about a Browns team that's really been bad back there in secondary. I think they've been protected by Myles Garrett and just that team's ability to rush the passer. But, getting more consistency back there, getting another starting corner would be something that could help them out.
And this is a guy who I think at the NFL level is going to be an interception machine. Brandon Cease, the tackling was fine this season. Like you said, though, he plays a lot of man coverage, and one of his biggest flaws is that he gets beat off press man a lot. But this is something I did not see with anyone else on tape. His ability to recover was next level. His speed is incredible, and his recovery in these routes is amazing. So when you've got a Browns team, like you said, with that pass rush, this is going to be a guy where a lot of quarterbacks will see a receiver that is breaking open for just a second off that press man, but this guy's going to come flying in and he's going to record an interception that is going to have a quarterback scratching his head. That's what he did at his time at South Carolina, and that's why he's climbed my board. I think that this is a guy who he's a really impressive cornerback, and in a cornerback class that, like I said, is kind of all over the place, this is a good shout for the Cleveland Browns, who need to improve that secondary. So I think they'll go with him at 24. And then at number 25, going back to the defensive tackles, I got Caden McDonald out of Ohio State going to the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, he's another one of those guys in the interior along with Peter Woods that are probably going to be, taken first among that defensive tackle group. But again, 6'2", 326 pounds. He's a big boy, Liam, and he definitely stood out. When you watch Ohio State just sitting there in the middle of that defense, being a plug. I think what he brings just physicality wise, and having those defensive Lineman of the Year honors at Ohio State in the Big Ten definitely brings a lot to like, and what he can be able to do at the next level. It's gonna be interesting to see his development. I mean, you could potentially say he could trim up a little bit and kind of get more in that pro shape, which I think is fair for a lot of these college athletes. But I think especially going on to a Bears team that spent so much on the last few seasons on offense, going back to the defense wouldn't be a bad idea for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've mentioned production a lot in this draft class, but I was mentioning with Peter Woods earlier. Peter Woods fits that mold of an NFL defensive tackle, and he's a little bit slimmer than McDonald, so he fits that frame a little bit better. But McDonald brought that production that most people were expecting out of Peter Woods this season. 65 total tackles, 3 sacks, 2 forced fumbles. This guy was flying to the football, and yeah, he was a force to be reckoned with on that defensive line. I think, though, that 6'3", 326-pound frame is something that you can mold at the NFL level. That gives you a lot of room to work with the proper development and a great coaching staff there in Chicago. He should have no problem adapting, and he is going to be a problem at the next level. I think he could be probably a little more secure of a pick than Peter Woods, but maybe not quite the ceiling that Peter Woods has. So I think that's why he goes to number 25. But then at number 26, this is another guy who a lot of people are very divided on. I have the Bills taking Cassius Howell, the edge rusher out of Texas A&M.
Yeah, I think, a lot of people have been divided just because of the body of work not being the highest, Liam, and just the low amount of sample size that you have on him. But 11.5 sacks in the SEC, I mean, you really can't complain on that when you talk about production. And at 6'3", 253 pounds, he definitely has a frame that you could build on. You could add more muscle to that. And, transferring up from Bowling Green, he's, made the change to jump up in elevation. I don't see why he wouldn't be able to do that in the NFL and be able to take that next step up when he's able to show he's hungry and be able to work hard and put that effort in.
Yeah, and the main concern for a lot of people has been his wingspan. His wingspan isn't quite what you'd want out of an NFL pass rusher, but I think when you look at 11.5 sacks, you look at what the presence that he had for that Texas A&M defense, I think that's gotta overrule it at a certain point. Some people have Howell sliding down to the second round. I don't think that's possible in this. It
shouldn't be
with what he put on film this season. And like, all respect to Texas A&M's defense, but he did not quite have that secondary pass rushing offense or option, I guess, on that defensive line that was really a distraction from him and forced offenses to scheme around a second guy. It was really just him, but he still got to the quarterback a lot. And like you said, that jump from Bowling Green to Texas A&M, of course, making that transition to the next level. He's proved he can do it once. Why not again? And what a team to do it with the Bills. I think that's the perfect spot for him. All right, and then next up is our first interior offensive lineman. That's going to be Olaya Vega Ione. I had to make sure I pronounce his name right. I always fumble it, but Ione, what a piece of that line for Penn State, and just a force and a great guard that the 49ers are getting here at number 27.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. Vega Ione falling this fall was a shock to me, Liam, because this is one of the guys that I kind of fell in love with during this, draft process of going through and looking at these guys and what they're able to do, because he's just a mauler. he loves to get his hands inside and run those feet until you are in the dirt, Liam Howard, especially Kyle Shanahan, his zone run scheme and what they want to do with Christian McCaffrey. He is physical. He can get out there, run, and lead the pack. This is a complete pro, in my opinion, that's going to be ready for the next level at 6'4", 320 pounds. Perfect on the interior, and I'm really excited to see what he's going to be able to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that you brought up Christian McCaffrey, because that San Francisco 49ers offense has really worked around him and looking to get, they've got obviously Trent Williams, who's been great for them at the tackle position, but they need a guy who can be in the middle and can create those running lanes for Christian McCaffrey. The amount of space that he's going to have this season is going to be incredible if they take Vega Ione at this pick. And like you said, him being available at this point is a bit of a fall for a guy of his caliber. He is a mauler. Like you said, he is going to put his hands on guys and he is going to move this pocket. And I think that's something also that works great for Brock Purdy as well, a guy who's dealt with injuries, a guy that they need to keep on their feet in San Francisco. So I think that this is the perfect, most pro-ready interior offensive lineman in this draft, and he is going to go to San Francisco and have a successful career there. But up next is another offensive lineman. I'm looking at Caden Proctor going to the Houston Texans at number 28.
Yeah, that's the other tackle. I think that completes the trio there, Liam, off the board of kind of those, premier guys you think that can come in and have an impact. And with Caden Proctor playing at Alabama, he definitely didn't have the season that I think, necessarily he wanted, and could have been a little bit more consistent and dominating in that aspect. But you look at the frame, you look about, again, the competition and things he's been able to do at 6'7", 350 pounds. I mean, he's a good prospect. You just have to take him, Liam. You have to trust your coaching to be able to get him right. And I think, especially at the next level, he's just a body that's going to fit.
Yeah, and for that Texans team, a lot was made about C.J. Stroud, not handling himself all that well in the pocket, making bad choices, but a lot of that was caused by him being on the run. He was on the run quite a bit this season, and the Texans need to do a better job of protecting him. They have a great receiver core, and I think that, those guys are going to get open. You just need to give C.J. Stroud enough time to get the ball to them. Caden Proctor is going to fit that mold. He's going to do that, and he is going to give C.J. Stroud enough time to be able to have a better season, I think, in 2026. Then that moves to the Kansas City Chiefs at number 29, and this is another guy that we actually did mention briefly earlier, a former Colorado Buffalo, Colton Hood, out of the Tennessee Volunteers.
Yeah, again, a guy who really elevated his, play style since leaving Colorado and being able to go out to Tennessee. Kind of one of those players who, won the transfer portal, I guess you could say in that aspect, but 6 foot, 193 pounds, very quick. He lines up well. He's able to, be very physical at the line of scrimmage. He's a good prospect, Liam. He's a really solid corner. Definitely would have liked to see him potentially play a little more football in college, I think, but the reason why he is going to the draft is because he's pro ready. He's got the talent, he's got the frame, and I think getting him into a team like the Chiefs, who's done really good in developing players, again, like I mentioned with the Rams earlier, I think that's a good fit for him.
Yeah, and I think with the Chiefs, they're needing to rebuild that secondary, and with Tennessee, we mentioned Jermon McCoy earlier missing the entire season. Colton Hood stepped up in that position, and he did not miss a beat. Tennessee was really worried about that secondary after Jermon McCoy went down, but Colton Hood made it so that you couldn't really notice that difference. He was still matching up with wide receiver ones in the SEC, doing an incredible job there. And, like you said, he's a great tackler, 50 tackles this season, and that's something that the Chiefs could really benefit from when rebuilding that secondary. He's just a great piece to start that rebuild around. So Colton Hood towards the late end of the first round here. And then that leads us to the Miami Dolphins. I've got them taking Emmanuel McNeill-Warren out of Toledo. This is a safety from Toledo, and I don't know how they keep recruiting so many good defensive backs there at Toledo. They've got some sort of they've got quite the eye for defensive backs in that personnel department. But just another incredible defensive back coming out of Toledo, Emmanuel McNeill-Warren.
Yeah, he fits the eye test again. He's a freak, Liam, just athleticism-wise. At 6'4" and 200 pounds, he's going to be a lot bigger than most defensive backs, and that's what kind of makes him exciting as a prospect, in my opinion. Again, you talk about a Dolphins secondary that has to replenish. I mean, that whole Dolphins might be bad next year, Liam. They might be really bad. I would be surprised if they're not, picking high next year, but I think he comes in and could, be that starter again for them that's going to come out and have an immediate impact. And again, at Toledo, there might be a little bit concerned just about the level of play, but hey, they've been developing. They've consistently shown that they could produce NFL level talent too. So don't knock Toledo, and I like Emmanuel.
Yeah, for sure, and I think that this is a guy that you can put anywhere on the defensive side. That's huge for this Dolphins team because they are so deplenished in that secondary. They need a guy who can play anywhere. This guy can play at the nickel. He can play press man outside. He can play safety. He can play anywhere you need him. He's good in zone coverage. He's a great tackler. 77 tackles this season, 3 forced fumbles as well. Hits the snot out of people. This dude is a physical freak. It still just perplexes me that Toledo is getting guys like this to come to the MAC and producing so many guys like this, year after year. But I think he'll be a great fit for the Miami Dolphins. That moves us to number 31 with the New England Patriots, and this is one that may surprise you a little bit. This is a guy who I watched in film, and this was the dude that I fell in love with, I think, the most in this entire process. I got Skyler Bell, the wide receiver out of UConn, going to the New England Patriots in a receiver room where there's who knows what's going on with Stephon Diggs. Even though he had a great season coming back, Stephon Diggs was not the answer, and so now they are looking to get someone, I think, in this loaded draft class, and they've got a guy who is a production machine in Skyler Bell.
Yeah, you talk about being All-American this past season, Liam. I think that's the first thing you kind of think of when you talk about Skyler Bell and just having those kind of accolades there. I think it is interesting that you have him, going in the first round. I'm not sure if he will actually be taken there or not. He's probably one of those fringe players that if a team does fall in love with him in the film, like you have, apparently could go out and get it. He just got really good speed as well and can do a lot of different things. But as far as what he can go ahead and bring to the Pats, like you said, with the Stephon Diggs situation kind of moving on, you definitely want more weapons for Drake May.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing with Skyler Bell, he was the second leading receiver in the nation this year, 1,278 receiving yards. He was a red zone threat, 13 touchdowns. He's rangy, great wingspan, great catching ability. This guy does not drop footballs. And you talk about Joe Fagnano, their quarterback, who didn't throw an interception until I think this third to last week of the season at UConn, and he had a great year. A huge part of that was Skyler Bell. This guy is a player that they used all over the place in Jim Mora's offense, and they've used him in the slot, they've used him out wide, they have used him anywhere in that offense, and there was a noticeable difference when he was off the field versus on the field. There was one game, I believe, I'd have to remember who they were playing. I believe it was the Duke game that I was watching, and he had to come off the field for an injury at one point, and it was the offense stalled. The offense really stalled when he was off the field, and that was just because he creates such a matchup nightmare for play. And that's a Power 4 team. That's an ACC team. You're playing ACC corners, and he was still having that type of success. That's something he did last season at UConn. He did it again this season. This is a guy who is going to surprise a lot of people. Like you said, I don't know if he'll necessarily actually go in the first round. This is this is our picks. If we were the GM, who would we take? I would take Skyler Bell at this point. This guy is a first-round caliber receiver, in my opinion. I think there is a slight drop-off until you get to the next guy, and I don't think there is another guy who you could push into the first round left in this class. So if you're the Patriots and looking for a receiver to, give Drake May some more options, you got to go with Skyler Bell, in my opinion. But then that leads me to my last pick of the first round. This is going to be the Seattle Seahawks, and I have them taking another tackle out of Utah, Caleb Lomu, going to the Seahawks to help shore up that offensive line.
Yeah, you talk about the other pair to go with, Spencer Fano over there at Utah. Both those big boys, got to see him up in person this past season. They're nasty, man. They're really nasty. And Caleb at 6'6", really good change of direction. He's got really good feet, and I think that allows him to be physical in the run game. And, he's able to take care of business in the pass game as well. Not necessarily where he's dominating, I think, but again, you have him as a front side blocker. I think he'll do really good things over there for the Seahawks, who made a great pick with Gray Zabel last year. Why not go get another offensive lineman?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that this was an offensive line for the Seahawks that did have some struggles throughout the season. It wasn't seen in the Super Bowl as much as it was with the Patriots. The Patriots, Will Campbell got quite exposed in that game. But I mean, I think we've talked. You know, you and I have talked a lot about Anthony Bradford and that offensive line and some of the things he's put on film. And although he is a guard for them, Caleb Lomu is a guy you could shift to that guard position if needed. He's 6'6", 304 pounds. You know, he's a bit leaner, and I think that's someone that you could move to that guard position. He could take over for Anthony Bradford. All right, Zoom cut off. I think Anthony Bradford didn't want me talking any more trash about him, but I mean, yeah, you got to shore up that offensive line. I think Caleb Lomu is the perfect guy to do it. So that concludes my first round mock draft. Like I said, Leo's is going to be published here on this same channel shortly after this one. So thank you for tuning in. Let me know down below if there are any different changes, any different picks you would make. Which guys out of this class do you love? Which picks you hate? Yeah, let me know down below. Thank you again to Leo for joining me, and that'll be all for this one.